Hi, I'm Norm Abram. Welcome once again to the new Yankee workshop, where today we're going to build one of these, called a pergola. What it really is a horizontal trellis supported by 4 columns. It's a great feature to have out in your yard or on your back deck. I'll show you where I got the ideas in a minute, then we'll come back and build one right here on the new Yankee workshop.
The new Yankee workshop features the craftsmanship of Norm Abram.
This pergola is built on the deck just outside the house. Now it's been here for about 10 years and it's held up really well. It's made from redwood and cedar. It has a lovely wisteria growing over the top of it. In the spring, the vine will flower, providing shade all summer long. So even on the hottest afternoon, it's very comfortable to sit out here. In the winter, the leaves will fall off, allowing the sunlight to go back into the house. It's also a great place to vacation your indoor house plants. It's really an extension of your house, a garden room. And once you have one of these, you'll wonder how you ever lived without one. So let's go build one. Now, when it came time to build our pergola, I chose pressure-treated southern yellow pine, which is about half the cost of redwood or cedar. And good pressure-treated pine will last at least 40 years. Now, our pergola has 6 elements. There are the post, these braces, then there's a short horizontal beam that sits on top of the post, on which sits 2 long 2x8s which form another beam onto which I can set these rafters, and then on top of the rafters a gridwork of 2x2 lattice. Now, if you'd like to build one of these for your backyard or your deck, a measure drawing is available, and you'll hear more about that before the program ends. To get started, I'll show you how I built these posts. Now, before we get started, let's take a moment to talk about shop safety. Be sure to read, understand, and follow all the safety rules that come with your power tools. Knowing how to use your power tools properly will greatly reduce the risk of personal injury. And remember this, there is no more important safety rule than to wear these safety glasses. Also at the shop, I wear my hearing protection when necessary. And a special note for this project, because we're working with pressure-treated lumber, which is treated with toxic chemicals, it's recommended to wear a dust mask and wash your hands when you're done. Now, this lumber, as it comes from the yard, varies somewhat in dimension. If I check this side, it's 5 11/16. If I check this side, it's 5 9/16. So the first thing I want to do is square up these 6x6s with my surface planer. Now, with one side planed, I want to flip it over and plane the opposite side. Now, with those 2 sides planed, I know that they're parallel to one another, but not necessarily square to the sides. Let's see how we're doing. If I check this side, that's pretty good. Let's check the other side. Ooh, that's not too good. That's out at least 1/8. So now what I want to do is make sure that the square side sets on the planer bed and the knives will straighten out the other side. All right, that's squared it up nicely. Now I want to flip it over and make one pass on the side that hasn't been through the knives. Let me show you what we want to do to this post next. I want to form a tenon. The shoulder will be right here where it meets this cross beam. The tenon will go all the way through the cross beam and up in between the 2 2x8s. And that'll all get bolted together to form a very strong joint. Let's make that tenon. All right, that takes care of that. If you look right out the window, you can see the next thing I want to do to the post. Each post needs a mortise to receive the tenon from that angle brace. I'll remove the majority material with a 1.5 inch Forstner bit. Then I'm going to switch to a 1/2 inch to do just the corners, and finally a chisel. The last milling operation for each column is to put a decorative chamfer at the corners. It starts about 18 or 20 inches up from the bottom and starts 5 1/4 inches down from the top. Now I found that rather than trying to watch the bit to determine where I want the chamfer to end, if I put a pencil mark to guide the base and I stop there, it's much easier. The next element to work on is the short beam that sits on top of the post. I have to have a notch to receive the post itself on the bottom. There's a couple notches on the top, which are for half laps on the 2x8s, and the mortise has to go all the way through for that tenon at the top of the post. Now the slots for the 2x8s at the top and the notch for the post on the bottom I made at the radial arm saw with the stacked dado head cutter, just as I did earlier on the post. With the layout for the mortise complete, I can just slide it over to my drill press, and I'll drill halfway through from this side, then I'll flip it over and drill the rest of the way through from the other side. Okay, with the mortise complete, let's put the decorative chamfer on these, just like I did on the post. Now the only edges that get chamfered on the beam are the 2 bottom corners, and the chamfer stops 4 inches from the column. I've just attached a piece of 1/4 inch plywood with the profile of the decorative cutout that I want to make in the end of the beam. I'm going to use my router to make the cut. I have a collar on the router base which will ride against the 1/4 inch plywood, and the longest 1/2 inch straight cutting bit that I could find in my inventory. And as you can see, that only makes it about halfway through. Now I'm not going to try to cut the full depth of the bit all at once. About a 1/2 inch at a time should do it. Now I'll just install the template on the other side and complete the cut. Okay, now we'll repeat the process on the other end. Now I'll just sand everything smooth using my detail sander. Next, I want to start working on the double 2x8 beams that sit on top of those 6x6 beams that we just finished. Each one of the 2x8s needs a notch at the bottom to sit over the 6x6 beam, and notches at the top at every rafter location. With my 4 2x8s clamped together as a group, I first laid out the location of each rafter notch. By treating them as a group, I'll get absolute uniformity between all the pieces. Now, I would have liked to have taken that group and just lifted it over to my radial arm and cut the notches with my stacked dado head cutter, but it's just too heavy and awkward. But there's another way to make the notches. We can use a router and a jig. The router is set up with a 1/2-inch straight cutting bit, and I made a jig that has sides that limit the side-to-side movement of the base, producing a notch that's exactly the right width. Okay, now what I want to do is, with the pieces still clamped together, I want to flip them over and make a couple notches where they sit over the beams. Now you'll notice that I can use the same jig even though my notch is going to be a little bit wider. Now, one more thing before I break this assembly down. I'm putting witness marks on the ends so that they don't get flipped around end for end when I do the assembly. Now we're ready to put some decorative cuts on the ends. Here's a piece of 1/4-inch plywood that I made as a template for the decorative cutout. This is the top of my beam, so I set the template up so that the decorative cut will be down, and I trace the outline. Now, I could cut this using my jigsaw, but the cut will be a little bit rough, and I know that after cutting several of them, they're not going to all be uniform. So I'm going to also use my router, but I'm going to start by using the jigsaw, staying about 1/8 of an inch away from the line. Okay, now I'm going to attach the template with a couple screws. Okay, now I'm going to flip it over so the template is on the underside. Now I'm going to clamp it to the workbench. Now here's where the router comes in. I've installed a straight cutting bit that has a ball bearing on it. And as you can see, the ball bearing is going to ride on the template, trimming off the excess wood. Now, with the template removed, I will complete this cut. Okay, 1 down, 7 to go. Now, as I complete each beam, I'm going to chamfer the lower edge with my block plane. Now for the rafters. Each rafter has a decorative cut on the end and a double notch where they sit over the 2x8s. At the top, there's a shallow notch at the intersection of every piece of lattice. I need 12 rafters. My rafters started out as 2x10s. I ripped them in half, yielding pieces that are 4 1/4 inches wide. I've ganged together 6 rafters and clamped them. Done the layout for the first notch I want to make, which is the one that sits over the 2x8. With the rafters flipped over, I'm now laying out along the top edge the location for the notches where the lattice pieces will sit. And they're every 12 inches on center. Now, just as I did with the beam that supports the rafters, I'm going to lay out the pattern for the end cut, a slightly different pattern, and remove the bulk of the material with my jigsaw. Now this time I will attach the template. Now I'll just flip the piece over and clamp it to the bench. Using the same router setup that I had earlier, with the router bit with the ball bearing at the bottom that rides on the plywood template, I'll remove the excess material. Well, now I can remove the template and go to the other end. I have 23 more ends to go. That's going to take a while. Now the next operation on the rafters won't take quite as long. Using some 80 grit sandpaper, I'm going to knock the corners off the edges of the decorative cut. And then along the bottom edge of the rafter, I'm going to use a block plane to knock off the corners. The braces are next. They set at a 45-degree angle with tenons that fit into the mortise and the post. It's extended up in between the 2x8s, and there's a nice arch on the inside edge. Hey, look at this. It's not going to slow us down right now. One of those summer showers just suddenly came through. But over here I have one of the braces laid out on a 2x8, and I'm going to make all the cuts with my circular saw. Now I'll make the arch cut on my bandsaw. I'm using a 3/8" radius roundover bit to ease the edges of the brace. Now a little more rounding over of the corners of the tenon so it'll fit in that mortise I made in the post. Well, it stopped raining, so I'll show you how to put one of these together. I have a couple of the posts propped up on some sawhorses with the mortises facing the inside. Now I want to take the short beam and slip it over the tenons. Now these pieces of strapping that I'm attaching with some screws will give me some temporary support until I get some upper pieces installed. Okay, now on the opposite end I set up the post and beam the same way, except I added an additional piece of strapping to hold the post plumb. Now I'm ready to set one of the beams. Okay, now just drop that in on the far end and pull this side over until these notches lock in. Good. Now's the time to make sure that all the posts are plumb. That's good, and that the beams are level. Good. Now this piece of strapping will hold everything square. Now I'm drilling a couple 3/8" holes through the beam and the tenon, and I'll secure everything together with some carriage bolts. Okay, once all those are secured, we can set the rafters. All right, the last one. Now I'll show you how I'm going to secure these. On the end rafters, I'm going to put one screw over the outer beam. On all the other rafters, I'm going to drive one screw at an angle into the 2x8 beam. Well, now for the braces. I added 2 thin strips of pressure treated, one on each side, 3/8 inch thick, so that the brace will fit snugly between the 2x8s. Of course, the tenon goes into the mortise. Now, bolts are okay up at the top, but here, where you're right at eye level, I think a couple nice hardwood dowels through the tenon will do the job. And finally, the lattice. Ripped from 2x4s, it's 1.5 inches square, and I secure it with 2 1/4 inch screws. Well, there it is, a pergola waiting for a wisteria vine. And once the vine matures, you'll have a garden room that you'll enjoy for many, many years.